Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Williams, and I'm Adult and Community Services Manager for the Columbia Public Library, which is part of the Daniel Boone Regional Library System. Welcome to today's Lunch and Learn. This program is co-hosted by the library and the League of Women Voters of Columbia Boone County. Today, we'll be hearing an update on the City of Columbia's Climate Action and Adaptation Plan and Water and Light's Integrated Electric and Resource Master Plan. And now I'd like to welcome League of Women Voters Board Member, Barbara Happy.
Thank you, Lauren. And hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our April Lunch and Learn program. We're very pleased to present Carolyn Amperan and Jay Hashscheider, who will give us an update on Columbia's Climate Action and Adaptation Plan and Columbia Waters and Lights Integration, Energy, and Resource Master Plan. Wanted to tell you a little bit about Carolyn and Jay, and then we'll turn the program over to Carolyn and then to Jay, and then we will take questions at the end. So be sure to put your questions in the chat feature. Carolyn Amperan was a member of the Columbia's Mayor's Task Force on Climate Action and Adaptation Planning, and is currently the chair of the Columbia Climate and Environment Commission. She is also a climate leader, a founding member of the Columbia chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby, and the chair of the executive committee of the Osage Group of the Missouri Sierra Club. Carolyn has invested the last 8 years in actively lobbying and organizing to fight climate change and to protect our environment. She finds her prior career in information technology in various technical, sales, and marketing positions with AT&T and IBM to have given her lots of skills that she can effectively use as a citizen activist. So thank you, Carolyn, for joining us. And Jay Hashscheider is a longtime Columbia resident. He holds a BS and MS from UMC College of Agriculture, Food, and Natural Resources, a former Peace Corps volunteer in Central America. Jay has worked in energy efficiency and renewable energy for 35 years. He worked for the City of Columbia Water and Light Department for many years and is now retired. He currently serves on the Water and Light Board and chairs the Integrated Electric Resource and Master Plan Task Force, maybe the longest commission name that we have, which he will share information with us also. So now I'll turn it over to Carolyn. Thank you, Carolyn, for being here.
Thank you very much. Let me just share my screen so we can get started. Okay, so welcome everyone, and thank you very much for joining today so that you can hear an update about the Columbia Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, which we call CAP for short. Today what I'm going to do is just tell you just a teeny bit about what the plan is, and then focus more on what progress we're making with it and what you could expect to see going forward, and how you can stay up to date on what we're doing. So the Climate Action Plan was approved by the City Council in June of 2019. So we're already coming up on our 2-year anniversary. Here in the middle picture, you can see the task force of Columbia citizens, including Jay and myself, who were members of creating that plan along with the community. A lot of public input was sought to build the plan. And the goals there in the top frame, the goals of the plan are really to reduce our emissions by the community and by the city operations, as well as adapt our community to the changing climate and be prepared for what that means for the future. So our ultimate goals are to make progress by 2035. You'll see there that we're asking the city operations to make even more progress than the community at large. 1, to set the example, and 2, because the city actually has more control over its own operations. The goal is to be 100% reduction in emissions by 2050 for the city and by 2060 for the community. So we have a lot of work to do before then. So it's important as we figure out what actions we're going to take to reduce emissions to know where those emissions come from. And so fortunately, the city started doing greenhouse gas emissions inventory several years ago. We used the year 2015 as our baseline for the measurements that we are working from and the progress that we're recording. The biggest part of our energy or our emissions in Columbia come from our energy use. This is across all the sectors of commercial, residential, and industrial. And so this, of course, is over 70% of our emissions. And so obviously, the largest factor that we can focus on in reducing our greenhouse gas footprint as a community. And that's why the work that Jay's going to talk about is so important and will be a really big lever in helping us achieve our goals. The other big area is transportation and mobile sources, and that's 27%. Columbia is very much a car-based community, so a lot of the actions in the plan try and focus on how we reduce emissions coming from transportation. It's important to understand how we compare to the rest of the United States and the rest of the world. I have this overall viewpoint of Columbia as being a, environmentally conscious city. So when I first saw these numbers, I was actually surprised that, we didn't even beat the United States per capita emissions average. But, and we don't know exactly why this is. We anticipate, where we figure that it's probably related to the fact that we're a very car-based community. But we have our work cut out for us, and we need to do our share to reduce our emissions, at least to get down, comparable with the rest of the United States, and ultimately to, stop polluting and do our share to contribute to the world's changes. The Climate Action and an Adaptation Plan is comprised of these 6 categories plus a category for implementation. We broke it into these areas to try and help, provide some structure and some thinking around how we can make progress in every area. Natural resources, of course, one of the benefits of natural resources is that they help us sequester carbon. So some of this carbon pollution that we're putting in the atmosphere, trees and vegetation, will take it out. And so that's an important area to focus on, as well as protecting our water resources. So the overall Climate Action Plan includes 161 different actions that are broken into these various categories. Now, in order to figure out if these actions were sufficient, would they help us reach those goals, and would we be able to achieve those goals, we worked as a task force and city staff with a consultant who has a modeling tool that can forecast changes. For example, if we convert to predominantly electrical vehicles, and then we put in different assumptions about that. If we convert to 100% clean renewable energy, which the plan calls for us to do that by 2035, what changes will that make? So with this wedge diagram, we call this the wedge diagram, you can see here that if we went with business as usual, which is this top black line, we would reduce emissions until 2028, when we've achieved the 30% goal of the current renewable energy standard that the city has, but it would start going up again if we didn't take further action. So by combining all the efforts of the various actions, we can not only meet our goal of 35% reduction by 2035, but we could exceed it, and we can make our goal of the 80% community reduction by 2050. So next I'll talk a little bit about implementation and what progress we're making. So with every project, it's important to have measurements so that you know where you started and how fast you're moving forward. And so there's a bunch more measurements on the city's dashboard, but I've got 2 to share with you today. One is the overall community emissions. And so you can see that starting again with that baseline of 2015, we have achieved about almost a 6% decline in community greenhouse gas emissions since then. And we measure these across those same sectors that we talked about earlier. We have also achieved for municipal emissions a 10.4% decline since 2015. So we're making good progress. But again, we need to accelerate these progress that we're making to achieve our goals. So in order to drive implementation and have citizen input throughout the implementation of the climate action plan, the City Council revamped previously we had what they called the Energy and Environment Commission, and they decided to revamp that commission and expand the size of it to create a new commission called the Climate and Environment Commission. We had our first meeting in December 2019. This is a voluntary group of citizens that are selected by the City Council. There's currently 15 members. If you're interested, our meetings are public and they're held at City Hall on the fourth Tuesday of the month, generally at 6 p.m. And the agendas, of course, are published in advance on the city website. And our role is really to help the city implement and achieve the goals of the Climate Action Plan. So I wanted to talk a little bit about both what the commission's doing and what the staff is doing. So the staff, and this is so important because, any plan that you don't have people working on implementing is just going to collect dust on the shelf. So it's so important that the City Council saw the need to, have this implementation commission, and that the city manager is very supportive of these staff teams that have been formed. So the staff has formed several cross-department teams because a lot of these actions, it's not just one department that needs to implement something, it's multiple or every department. And so the staff has formed these teams that you can see here: clean energy, healthy housing, resource stewardship, good stewards, and clean transportation. And so they're working alongside the commission. And a lot of times if they have, for example, a new policy or a plan that they're developing, then they'll share that with the commission, and we'll provide our input on it, and vice versa. If the commission's working on something, then we will share that with the staff teams and get their input. So it's a very collaborative process. I mentioned, that we have a goal of trying to achieve 100% renewable clean energy for our electricity by 2035. So this is one of the important commissions, the the important teams, the clean energy team. And again, Jay's work and that task force work is really critical to achieving that goal. We also are focused on housing because, as you saw, the consumption of electricity and natural gas for heating and cooling our homes and other activities is a critical and huge component of the carbon footprint that we have today. And so one of the things we're working on in that area is, trying to establish as a precedent that every home or building in the community has an energy and efficiency score. And that when you would go to sell your house or buy a house or get a rental unit, you would be able to understand the energy efficiency of that building. And this isn't only good for the climate crisis, it's also good for helping all of us have, control of our utility bills. Because obviously a home that is highly energy efficient, it should be more valuable to you than one that is very inefficient, and you would have very high utility bills. Under resource stewardship, they're thinking about things like water conservation. Good stewards, they're thinking about things, again, about building energy use for the city, but also how we use our public lands to assist with carbon sequestration and water conservation. Clean transportation, they're focused on the city's vehicle fleet and how we make that more efficient and switch to cleaner fuels, and also supporting the community in the shift to electric vehicles by planning for and implementing charging stations. So the commission, as part of the annual report, which was presented to the City Council in February, we decided to focus on the money. As they always say, follow the money, because we want to impact as quickly as possible to get city operations to focus on implementing these actions and change the changes that need to be made. And so we felt one of the critical ways to do that is the budgeting process and the decision-making process. So as part of the annual report, we made budget recommendations for fiscal year 2022 And the city is in the process right now of planning the 2022 fiscal year budget. So I'll talk a little bit about what those priorities are coming up. So one of the first things that we did recommend to the city as a commission is implementation of a decision-making process that's called the triple bottom line. And this is something that other communities are using. We particularly liked in our analysis of what other communities were doing, we liked the way Fort Collins, Colorado had implemented it. So we've taken their model and tweaked it and modified it a bit for the city, and it's going to be piloted by those staff teams on some upcoming decision-making on various projects. And what this means is that, typically the city is going to make decisions based on how much things cost, where do the dollars come from, what's the return on investment, and oftentimes that return on investment is pretty much a financial decision. But with triple bottom line, you give equal weight to the impact on the community from the people, planet, and prosperity. So the people, you take into effect social and equity dimensions. Are we being equitable to all aspects of the community? Are we helping to overcome past equity differences with the decisions that we're making? For the planet, are we making the right choices for the climate crisis? Are we, preserving our natural resources for future generations? For prosperity, this isn't just about, of course, evaluating cost versus expenditures, versus revenues and benefits. It's also about, are we creating enough jobs for the people, that habitate in Columbia? Are those jobs the right kind of jobs to be providing people with a good standard of living? Are we planning for diversity? So it's really looking at these project decisions across all of these factors, rather than just comparing, project choice A versus project choice B on which one is going to be more financially advantageous. And so, as I said, this is being piloted right now, and we hope to be able to implement it across the city as quickly as possible. So some of the other budget recommendations that we made, because as I said, with most big organizations, where the money goes is they always say, you show what you value by what you spend money on. And so we're really trying to influence that process. So one of the things that the Climate Commission has put forward is that the city needs to develop a new street design plan with public input, which would involve a whole public input process. And so that would be something that needs funding. And what we mean by street design plan, and you see this on some of our streets, but we can go even further with it, and that a street needs to not just be designed for cars. It needs to be designed to accommodate pedestrians and public transportation and bicyclists and scooters possibly, and any kind of other transportation or mobility for people that isn't just a vehicle, because we need to be able to not depend on our cars so much in order to meet our greenhouse gas emissions goals. Another one is to make streets safe for pedestrians and bicyclists. We need occasionally what we call traffic calming. Certain times in the city, you'll have these traffic situations crop up where a street becomes heavily utilized, people are speeding, whatever, and you need to take action. So, and I already talked about the work on the fleet and on the electric charging stations. In housing, buildings, and development, we wanted to make sure that there's budget money to really support the programs that we hope to roll out related to rental energy efficiency standards, energy performance ratings for homes and businesses and rentals, and of course, energy scores for city buildings. For health, safety, and well-being, this is the part of the plan that focused the most on adaptation. And so we want the community to be prepared for the extreme weather that we would ultimately face. And one of the ways to do this is by creating neighborhood resilience. And we were able to obtain, the city staff was able to obtain a grant to help us with a pilot project that we're calling Climate Ambassadors. And so this is being rolled out in one neighborhood in Columbia. And as we learn from this, we will roll it out to other neighborhoods. Natural resources, I mentioned this is an important area for conserving water and also driving carbon sequestration. And so again, it's more expensive than you would think to plant trees and maintain them to make sure that they continue to thrive. And so we need to make sure that we're allocating money to this. Fortunately, we have a wonderful parks and recreation program already, and this would just be adding to that and how we maintain our public lands. Energy, again, is our most important area. And so we wanted to make sure the budget reflects our goal to, at least at this point, to try and reach 100% clean energy by 2035. And a lot of the work that Jay and his team is doing is going to help us know how we do that and how much it's going to cost. So what can you do to help support the city's work with the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan? Well, one thing that you can do is you can really understand the plan and monitor progress. So the city has created a very nice online dashboard at Como Climate Action, and you can drill down into the actions that were recommended in each of these categories, as well as understand some of the measurements that are category specific and how we're monitoring this and the progress we're making. And then you can also, if you're on Twitter, you can follow Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. You can follow Como Sustain or Sustainability and get weekly information on either things that you can personally do or that the city is doing and making progress on. Also, if you want even more details on what I'm talking about today, you can review the annual report. It's available for download as a PDF from comoclimateaction.com. And then I also just wanted to share some other actions that you could take. It's so important to contact your elected officials and request climate action. They need to know that you care, because when we lobby, you know, in some of my other work, I lobby with elected officials at different levels of government, whether it's state, federal, county, or city. And as they say, they still don't hear from enough people that that climate action is a priority. So that's super important. Just talking about the climate action plan, making sure that your neighbors and your friends and family are aware of it and what's going on. Share after this video gets posted from this event today, share it out and make sure that people know what's going on. It's so important, you know, this is hosted by the League of Women Voters, so I have to give a pitch for voting. It's so important to vote in every election and pay attention to which officials or candidates will take climate action. You know, this is making a real difference at local and county levels across the country. And, you know, now we're going to be also getting federal action again. So it makes a huge difference. Take your personal steps to reduce your carbon emissions. You know, you can make a big difference in your home and your business. And if you have another group that you would like or organization that you would like to have a presenter for, you can reach out to me at carolyn.omperon@gmail.com. And whether you want to have a presentation on climate change and climate change impacts or what the city is doing or, you know, some other aspect, you know, just let me know what you're interested in and I can help arrange a speaker. And then I just wanted to close with the thought, this comes from the United States National Climate Assessment from 2018. Every decision we make today is impacting our climate risk for tomorrow. And by climate risk, I mean that risk of extreme weather, of droughts, of, you know, crop failures, and those type of things that are in our future if we don't take action. So future risk from climate change depend primarily on decisions made today. So this isn't something that we can wait and do in the future. We have to make the right choices today to take action to reduce the carbon pollution so that we have a better future. And so, you know, my closing question for you will be, you know, how will you help? And so with that, I'm going to close and I'm going to turn it over to Jay, and we are going to take questions after Jay finishes his remarks.
Unmute. There.
And thank you very much. I am going to now put up my PowerPoint for everybody to follow. There we go. I also want to thank everybody for being here and being present at the Lunch and Learn. I hope everybody's having a good lunch. I had a nice brunch earlier. And so we want to get this day underway and get you so that you can get outside and enjoy the rest of the day. But I do appreciate your being here, and I want to explain our project, which I'm titling A Unique Project for Columbia. And the reason I'm calling it unique is that there are several reasons, many reasons actually, but the main, most important ones is what I think follows on the heels of what Carolyn had just talked about, which is climate change. We are at this threshold of like this decade that we are already well into is being called the decade of decisions. And if we don't make the right decisions this decade, we could end up not being in charge of like our destiny. If we make the wrong decisions, climate can take over, and that will be not a good situation. So it's a very unique time in our history, but it's also it's very unique from the standpoint of our task force itself. The council put together a task force and charged us with some responsibility to do things that the ordinary task forces that I have seen and participated in have not had with the authority and responsibility. So this task force has been involved in the project from the very beginning, and that's a very unique situation. And finally, it is a unique situation or a unique project from the standpoint that the plan itself consists of three major elements, and typically in the past, utilities have just undergone planning of all these three independently. They have not combined them or tried to integrate all three into one project, which this has done. So we have a uniqueness there where we're talking about the integrated electric resource side of it, a master plan side of it, and also a cost of service. And I'm going to explain all of these things. I do want to say that I had hoped originally that we would be at the point where I could be talking about final results today. However, we're not there. Unfortunately, the way things have drug out is we are still in the closing phase of this, and we haven't gotten the final results. And in particular, what we're looking at trying to get our first completion is to do the first two, the integrated resource plan and the master plan. And so I'm going to focus on those two with the rest of the talk. The integrated resource plan is simply a way of integrating the amount of power that's needed to meet the load that is expected. And so typically these plans go in 10 to 20-year time horizons. And what they do is they forecast electricity needs and then try to identify what options there are available on the supply side. How many power plants would be needed or contracts would be needed in order to supply that power and energy, or the other side of that, which has been more concern over the last few decades, is the demand side option. How many projects can, how many kilowatt hours or megawatt hours can be reduced from those needs if we start doing more conservation work and fund projects that deal with that. And the Water and Light Department has a rich history in dealing with demand side management projects. And the IRPs have reflected that, and I'm going to talk about it in here in just a minute. So what the IRP then does is compare the supply demand side options and mixes and comes up with the most attractive proposal, and then identifies what the costs are so that the utility can proceed to with some idea of how much revenue is going to be needed over the next few years. Now that is the supply of energy. The other point that our major planning requirement is to identify the transmission and distribution planning that occurs, and that's goes under the name of master planning. So one of the IRP that we just talked about is the supply of energy, so to speak, and then it's not where it comes from, but how do you get it there? And typically the transmission system will go from the power generation source to a substation. Columbia has something like 9 substations. And then from there, it gets distributed in lower voltages throughout the neighborhoods and areas. And that is what's called the distribution system. And so master planning looks at both of those elements, the transmission and distribution side of the equation. And what it does is it not only it looks at what's going on today, but also what are the growth patterns within that distribution network, and so that they can identify ahead of time the potential for pinch points or areas where a large amount of demand or growth would create problems that could then result in outages for down the road. So to avoid those, the master plan will suggest infrastructure changes and different ways of meeting the loads of the intra customer system that will the utility can then follow to avoid any of those unwanted consequences. Finally, the cost of service is the last element of this project, and it identifies the total revenue needs, those that come from the supply and demand side options, the IRP, and then also those costs that are embedded in the transmission distribution improvements, and identifies where those costs are basically allocated in terms of customer sectors, such as residential, industrial, and commercial. And then it designs rates to recover the needs, the revenue needs that those costs will bring to bear. And so what you see is basically just a way of allocating all of those costs into the commodities. And you might note that I've included here transportation because as we go into the future, it's quite probable that transportation is going to become an electrified affair. You see all of these car companies that are saying that they're not going to be making any internal combustion engines after some period in the future, and some of them are quite soon. So we are expecting the transportation sector to become much more of a reality and an impact than it is right now. So in the IRP, what we did as a task force is we, as I mentioned, wrote the request for proposals, and then we selected the bidders to which ones we wanted to actually interview, and we conducted the interviews and then selected the consultants that have been chosen to complete these. And so the net result of that is that Siemens Industry is the consultant that is doing the first two, the integrated electric resource and master plan, and the cost of services being conducted by Horizons Prime Energy. And so I'm going to go through just a lot of information. It's impossible to cover everything, and I apologize if I'm going very fast. But I wanted to try to give at least the highlights of all of the elements of what we're working with. And so these are the tasks that have comprise the integrated resource plan, not the master plan, but just the resource plan. And you can see that there's quite a lot there. What I want to do is sort of guide your thoughts. Well, the first one is primarily forecasting the amount of energy that is probably needed over the next 10 years, 10 to 20 years, and then evaluating what are the exact assets that we have right now, looking at the contracts, existing coal plants and so forth. And so the evaluation part, and then integrating all that information together so that we can come up with a portfolio and do some analysis of which way that we want to go. And then the final two are primarily, they're sort of just a review. It's not, I guess, material to the study as much as just these are also things that we wanted to look at. And so those are the major segments of the resource plan. What I wanted to dwell on just a moment is this number 5, which is the analysis of uncertainty through scenario analysis. And what this is an interesting approach, which I had not seen before, and it's bases the uncertainty that you have going forward with different scenarios. And I think that becomes evident when we look at past plan. This came from the 2008 plan that was produced by Burns McDonnell. And in it, it projected a certain growth. We have historically been at a certain growth of about 2%. And they predicted a growth rate over the term of this plan of about 1.82%. And that was also true for energy use and for the amount of demand, the peak demand that we would have. So that was what was predicted back in 2008. And in actual fact, that has not grown at all because of many different reasons, and nobody really knows exactly, but we have many different efficiency improvements through the local projects that we've done through demand management. We also have, like, the federal government that has produced many different kinds of energy efficiencies and clients. We've also had differences in growth, and we've had our differences in our economic growth. So there's a lot of issues that can be part of that, but it's a pretty astounding fact to have that growth be as pretty flat as it has been over the last decade. And I don't think that you can count on that in the future either, but it certainly shows that there's some uncertainty in these plans. And if you look at the demand curve, instead of it going up, it also has remained basically relatively flat over the last decade. And so these scenarios that are being proposed are really ways of saying, okay, what does our future look like? And if you look across the top of the scenario element, or the scenarios, you can see the first one is reference case, and then it moves to high technology, and then over the yellow ones are the early utility renewable and high seasonal load. These are just different ways that could be configured, or could configure the future in terms of electric supply. What the consultant is doing is then using all of these parameters to come up with that load forecast, which will then follow, which many things will follow from. And I want to kind of get a little bit closer on this. The first 3 lines, if you look at them, it's the utility goal, or the city goal, I'm sorry, of 80% carbon reduction by certain date, or 100%. And then the third line down is the utility, electric utility at 100%. And right now, the electric utility is through the Climate Action Plan, based on this idea of hitting the 2050 mark for 100% renewability, renewable energy. That is not in all of those cases. That's just the reference case. And as you can see over in the middle, where you have the early utility renewable and the midterm, and that is right in this area, right in here. you can see that the utility in this scenario would be at 2030, reach that 100% renewable mark, or in the midterm utility, reach it at 2040. And so these are ways that we can see what the utility would need to do to reach those marks. And then right now we have the ones that are just highlighted. Those have come to us with key elements, and so what we have are things like this. It talks about highlights from each of those scenarios, and I'm not going to go into that, and then it boils all of that down into total cost. And I have to point out that these are not fixed figures. These are things that have they're still preliminary numbers, but that's what we'll end up with, was that final cost. So the other next element that I want to cover is the master plan. This has, again, a number of tasks that are involved, but we have just short amount of time. I want to dwell on this task number 4, which is the transmission expansion. As you are aware, I'm going to skip through that. As you are aware, there's been there's quite a bit of transmission controversy that stemmed from the last 5 years when the voters voted on a transmission plan, but then that was, I guess, put on hold by the city council something like 5 years ago. And so we are still trying to figure out what a transmission option would be. And transmission, if you followed what happened in Texas recently, very important to the reliability of our city, along with resilience to things, forces of nature and so forth, and as well as redundancy to avoid equipment malfunctions. So what the task force has at this juncture is basically 7 different proposals in front of them. Several of them have been around, but some are new, and that includes the ones that are checked there are relatively new transmission options for the city of Columbia, and they're going to be looked at, and the task force is going to pass their thoughts onto the city council as part of our final report. I did want to mention the non-wires alternatives, and this has been championed by several of the task force members, including Tom O'Connor, and basically the non-wires alternative brings into the effect of a whole bunch of different intensive uses of technology, from smart grid technologies to batteries to rooftop solar, including a high degree of appliances and energy efficiency in homes and businesses. And so it's just a very in-depth use of all of these technologies could avoid the need for the possibility, at least, that could avoid the need for a transmission system and still achieve at least close to the same reliability. There are going to be some other outstanding issues that haven't covered here, but will be covered, and that they include the advanced metering infrastructure, and that's where we have smart meters that can talk back and forth to the utility, and then as well as as mentioned, the cost of service that's not completed yet. Line extension policy: how much does a new customer what should the cost be for a customer hooking up to the lines? A value of solar, and then also the revenue and financing mechanisms that could help bring the money together to make this happen. And then finally, the rates. And I want to kind of just briefly talk about the timeline. We've been at this for 3 years. We started 3 years ago this July, and it just seems like an incredible amount of time to be working on one project. But as I try to portray, it's very complex, very involved, and it's also quite, it's the first time that this has been done. So, in the first year and a half, we basically got the contractor on board. And then we were just beginning to understand what the contractor was going to do when the pandemic shutdown occurred last year. And then as we started up and receiving and getting some of these results back, we have gotten to the point we're at today, which is very much close to where we want to be. We had hoped we would be finished with, but we still have a lot of work to do. And I'm thinking that in the next 2 months, it will be critical for us to get a whole lot of information out and finally get this to the council by early summer at the latest. And so we have a lot of work to do. This is the list on the right shows the people that have been that are currently on the task force. Obviously, in 3 years, we've had several changes, and that's a picture of an earlier version of the task force, but a bunch of very dedicated people that have stuck with this through time and have gone through many meetings to try to identify what the important aspects and so that we can make a clear report to the council. The site that I'm pointing out here, the Google site, is where anybody can find all the documents that we have received from contractors and go through on a step-by-step basis. Unfortunately, it's not very well organized, but it is not managed by the task force. Anyway, all of the information is there. What I want to do is talk about the purpose and actually the resolution that we created the task force, because these are the things that we're supposed to do, which is in section 1 to assist the staff in doing these things. We're ensuring public participation. And I want to say that all, like Carolyn's meetings, our meetings are all open except for the ones that have to be closed. And so we have a meeting this Thursday, as a matter of fact, at City Hall. It's going to be the 15th, and then we'll have a meeting on the 28th, and then one on the 13th of May. So public is certainly welcome to attend. And we're also very delighted to give this presentation or talk about this in public forums such as this one. And then the other two review the capital requirements and review costs to expand the infrastructure. Now I'm going to skip over section 2 and 3, but section 4 is the task force shall make a report with its findings and recommendations related to the IERMP, and then we will be dissolved. So that is going to be our graduation day, and that's the one that we're really looking forward to. And we hope that we make the investment of all this time that we put in, that we can make this an investment that pays off for the city and the city council as it makes its decisions in the future. As I mentioned, this is a unique point in our history. We have, at this point, we have the forces of change. We have the climate, we have equity, we have economy, environment, and sustainability, and other issues that are trying to say that the old way is not the same as we want to do it in the new way. But those forces meet the reality of the financial stability and reliability risks that are always present. So of all of that, we're going to have to make decisions on these scenarios and what the rates are going to look like and which transmission options are going to. And so there's a lot of decisions that have to be made. They will be made at the council level. My request is that everyone that has an interest pay attention to the points where they can make an impact, which one can contact the people on the task force. You can call the city and leave messages so that we can get in touch with you. This is my personal email. If you have an interest, we would like to hear that, but I think the council would also like to hear it as they're trying to deliberate on how the utility should choose to move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay Hasheider, for that explanation. And we do have a few questions, and if you have questions, feel free to put them in. We will have at least 10 minutes for questions, and we could go a little longer. The first question relates to Carolyn Amperen's presentation on the climate plan. And it says, what is neighborhood resilience and how is it measured?
Yes, so I don't really, I'll be honest, I don't really know how we would measure neighborhood resilience, but the idea behind it is to be able to create neighborhoods that can help take care of each other in the event of a natural or weather disaster or some other crisis. So, you know, we've seen some of this hopefully with the pandemic, with neighbors helping neighbors, and you can tell when there's a major disaster. Let's, you know, use the thing in recent situation in Texas, for example, where, you know, it was very cold. They're not used to the cold. They had no electricity. You know, the demand for people needing help from somebody else could be overwhelming. And so we can't rely just on our city operations to be able to provide all the resources that might be needed in that type of natural or weather disaster. So we have to be able to depend on each other. And so the idea with neighborhood resilience is to foster a neighborhood structure to be able to depend on each other. Also, the climate ambassadors would be involved in helping neighborhoods be able to strive towards making the changes that we need to make. And then a third aspect of it is we hope ultimately to create what we would call neighborhood resilience hubs. So just to use an example that to me is really easy to think about is to take, like, for example, the Columbia Daniel Boone Regional Library. Not that they've agreed to this, but it is a center of activity today. They provide lots of community activities, and you would take a center like that that's already a community hub, and you would do things to it to make it resilient, like it might have its own solar power and battery backup. So if we lost all electricity, it could still function. You might take, you know, some of their storage and you would put, you know, food and medical supplies and water, so that it could be a hub for people to get resources that they might need. And so we hope to do that around the city. So it's kind of a multi-pronged strategy.
Oh, thank you. The next question is MU an active partner in this plan, the climate and environment plan of the city?
I would say yes, but could be more. Initially, the MU Sustainability Manager was a member of the task force and the Climate and Environment Commission. I believe with the budget cuts that MU had to implement the past year, that they eliminated the Sustainability Manager position. We do still have some members of MU faculty on our commission, so they are participating. The other good news is that MU actually has its own sustainability plan where they want to, reduce their carbon emissions by 2050. So in that sense, they are a partner. Right now, we're not collaborating together as much as we could. We're working more independently, but that's primarily because we have so much work to do to get the city government and city operations and our other aspects of the community moving forward, that as long as MU has, they are doing their own thing and making progress, and but they will definitely need to be a partner for us to achieve our overall goals.
And I'd like to add to that, just for the participants, that when I was on council, Columbia got its first sustainability manager, and I pushed for that, and we actually got Barbara Buffalo, who was the sustainability manager from the university. So hopefully she still has communication and connections with the university on maybe an more informal basis. But anyways, that was a good steal from the university. I had one question, and then we'll move on to some other ones. Monday is National Hangout Laundry Day. And I was wondering, was that part of the plan? Is there a measurement of how much greenhouse gases can be saved if people hang out their laundry instead of use the electric dryer? I've been doing it for my whole life.
Yeah, well, good for you.
The hangout laundry, not the dryer.
Yeah. Yes, there is no specific action in the plan about that. The actions are kind of more general about just reducing energy demand. But certainly I would encourage people, now that the weather is nice, to, start using, as they call the modern drying system, wind and solar outdoors.
Right,
I do it myself, so.
right. It's good for your psychology, your
Oh
mental.
yeah, I actually find it very relaxing to go out and hang the laundry, so.
Our next question is, what types of renewable energy sources is the city committed to using if the goal is to be using 100% renewable energy by 2035? But I'm not sure that that is the goal. I thought the renewable energy for the city was 50% by 2035 and 100% by 2050. Can you clarify that?
I'll just clarify the goals and I'll let Jay talk to the sources. The CAP specifically states a goal for electricity renewable energy of 100% by 2035. The other goals that you mentioned, Barbara, are the reduction of overall greenhouse gas emissions.
Okay, great. And so Jay, can you speak to the types of renewable energy sources?
Right. The only ones that I am remembering, and I have to kind of like do this from the report that generated some of the scenarios, was solar and wind. And I think that the solar was primarily from utility solar that would be, locally, but then wind would be from other contracts of wind that were from other areas, Iowa, Kansas, that type of thing. I know that we have already in place a certain amount of acquisition of wind, which is also, as well as solar farms that are local. But a big piece of the wind is really dependent on the transmission system. I think it's the transmission. I can't think of the name of it.
Grain Belt
coming
Express.
Across Missouri. And when and if that occurs, it will bring a lot of wind power into the area, and we would be able to, through Missouri, and we have a contract for a significant portion of that.
Thank you. We have two more questions. One is, when will the IERP, Integrated Energy and Resource Master Plan, be ready? When will the report be ready for the city council? I don't know. I have no idea. Any guesses? Hopes? A year, 2 years?
It's gone.
Okay.
We can still hear you, Jay.
Maybe he can't hear us.
Oh.
Okay,
Okay.
I hear you now.
Oh, okay. Did you hear the question?
No.
Oh, when will the Integrated Energy and Resource Master Plan report be ready for the city council?
Well, our goal is to have it ready and delivered to the council in June.
Oh, okay.
If we establish that goal, that would be great. But the one part will come from the consultants, and the accompanying report will come from the task force itself.
Okay, great. And then the last question, can the city do anything to assist homeowners who are restricted by subdivision covenants from doing such things as hanging laundry out, putting solar panels on roofs, etc.?
I guess I'll take that one. So I've been researching this a little bit. My understanding is, yes, ultimately we can do something, but it isn't, right now it isn't at the top of the priority list. But yes, this is a big annoyance that, we're trying to get people to do these things, and then some subdivisions are telling people they can't. So it's obviously something that we do need to change. I would encourage everyone, to try and change this from within your own subdivision by, working together with your neighbors. But I also anticipate that once we do try and do something from a city perspective, there probably will be a political battle over this, as some subdivisions really love their covenants. So, and I also encourage people to really look at those covenants before they move into a neighborhood, and shop with your money. If you don't like the covenants, and don't buy there. And that's something that we all have to start. As Jay and I both talked about, the decisions that we make today are very important, even down to looking at those factors. So,
And some of the older neighborhoods don't have covenants. And that's also, if you're buying a house there that goes towards infill, that might be helpful too. So another thought. Well, I want to thank Carolyn Amperan and Jay Hashsider for joining us today and sharing this important information. Thank you, Lauren, for hosting and co-hosting with the Columbia Boone County Library, our Lunch and Learn programs. I wanted to let people know that our next Lunch and Learn program is on May 11th. It's going to be on Zoom again, and it's going to feature youth-related mental health issues, and it's going to be presented by the Children's Grove. They have a social, emotional, and mental well-being interest group, so they will be presenting that. And the speakers will be Chad Rose, Heather Harlan, and Leslie Huber, I think. And also, I wanted to remind people that this month, April 28th, the League of Women Voters will have their annual meeting on Zoom at 7 p.m. And our guest speaker will be Kathy Kylie, who's a journalist. And we will also be giving out the Eleanor Googe Award to a very hardworking League board member, Carol Schreiber. So I hope you can join us April 28th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. And with that, hope you have a good day and enjoy this lovely sun and warm weather. Thank you again.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
And hang out your laundry on Monday.